Right. Welcome, everyone. My name is Cindy Grove, and I am the director of the Rockport Public Library. I welcome you to here for tonight's program. Tonight, we are going to be learning about the saving of the Squalus. And this program is about in 1939 off the coast of Portsmouth, New Hampshire. One of America's newest submarines, the Squalus, was making a final test dive prior to being commissioned by the U.S. Navy. During what appeared to be Bell rescue of any trapped submariner in a routine dive, somehow tons of water flooded her and ultimately drove her to the bottom. So there's a great story here that I'm excited to learn about. And with us today, we have the amazing Bill Beacon, who is a visiting lecturer who takes on historical events, often reflects on the great challenges and courage put forth by people who have made history, with a focus on the human element. Sorry, I keep losing track while I'm letting people in, and I'm glad to see so many people coming in. Bob's lectures span a wide range of topics, including the Lawrence of Arabia, the USS Quincy, and the Coconut Grove Fire of 1942. Ooh, I didn't know that, Bob. That's an interesting one. Bob grew up in the Lewiston-Auburn area and worked as a carrier for the Lewiston Daily Sun and the Lewiston Evening Journal. He graduated from Babson College with a degree in business administration. He and his wife, Mary, have been married for 48 years. Congratulations. They have 2 sons and 5 grandchildren. Fantastic. And already in just my short discussion with Bob, an absolute wealth of information. So I am very excited about this program, and I am so grateful that you could all join us. I want to thank Bob for being here. Thank you for being here. And thank the Friends of the Rockport Public Library for sponsoring not only today's event, but all of our programming. So welcome, and I will pass the screen off to you, Bob. Oh, and one final note, please hold questions till the end. So there's going to be lots that he's going to go through, and then we'll take questions at the end. If you have any technical issues, just put them in the chat and I will try to help you out. And closed captioning is available, and you can click on that if you so desire. Thank you. And thank you, Bob.
Thank you, Cindy. This is a great talk, and it's right in our backyard, Portsmouth, New Hampshire. Okay. In May of 1939, off the coast of Portsmouth, the newest submarine in America's fleet, the Squalus, was conducting final diving trials prior to her joining the Navy. She was built at Portsmouth Navy Yard, a major source of submarines for America's Navy. The Squalus represents the latest in capabilities, weaponry, and engineering, and she's going to be part of America's response to the growing threats displayed by the navies of Germany and Japan. She's a fleet type sub, an overall length of 310 feet, a beam of 27 feet. She displaces 1,450 tons. On the surface, her top speed is 16 knots. Submerged, her top speed is 9 knots. She's powered on the surface by 4 1,600 horsepower diesel engines. Below, her power comes from 126 lead acid storage cells, big batteries, each of which weigh 1,650 pounds. Providing air to the Squalus are 2 main vents They're known as the high induction valves. One is 31 inches wide. That brings the air to her diesel engines when the boat is surfaced. A lesser one with a 16-inch width provides air when she is underwater. Her main weapons, torpedoes, 21 feet long, 21-inch diameter. They weigh about 2,500 pounds. There's a range of 4,600 yards. She also has a small 3-inch gun on her surface on the deck. Painted on the side would be number 192. This number here, number S11, that's a building number. But once she's accepted by the Navy, her commissioning number will be number 192. The normal size crew for a submarine of this size consists of 57 men, which is 5 officers and 52 enlisted men. All of the men in the submarine service are volunteers. Now, if you want to be a submariner, you need to pass a pretty rigorous screening, both physical and mental. You must have near perfect lungs, a good respiratory tract and stomach, and be free of sinus troubles. Your ears must be able to withstand a pressure greater than 50 pounds per square inch, because that's the pressure you would be exposed to if you were to use the Momsen lung, which is an escape assist. Your hearing must be above average. From a behavioral aspect, you must have no irritating habits or nervous traits that would grate upon your fellow crewmates. And cleanliness is a must. Now, if you're an officer and you want to qualify, all of these apply, as well as a minimum of 2 years service with a flawless record. If you do qualify, you become a member of an elite unit. Aboard subs, there's far less spit and polish and protocol. Confined space forces men to work together and to relax as members of a cohesive and dedicated crew. The saying, once a submariner, always a submariner. That's a powerful statement. To bear this commitment out, it's worth noting that of the 33 survivors rescued from the Squalus, all 33 men continued service aboard the submarines. There were some extra benefits. For enlisted men who had a base pay of $54 a month, they also received a 25% bonus and an additional $1 per dive, but that could not exceed $15 a month. Food was always of the best quality and plentiful. Now, in the 30s, America was still working her way out of the Great Depression. Jobs were scarce, and to many a young man with an unsure future, recruiting posters saying, join the Navy and see the world, they had a great effect. You could sign up, have a job, learn a trade, see the world, and at the same time, serve your country. As proof of this appeal, the crew of the Squalus came from 28 different states. Early on the morning of May 23rd, 1939, the Squalus is preparing for a test dive, simulating a high-speed dive for an emergency battle descent. She has to go from the surface to periscope depth of 50 feet in 60 seconds. Her commanding officer, Lieutenant Oliver Naquin, Annapolis, class of 1925, he's expecting improvement by at least 5 seconds from her previous dive. In addition to her normal crew, she would also have 3 civilians on board. They are there to monitor the mechanical and the various electrical systems. One of these civilians, Harold Preble, he's the civilian technical superintendent at the Portsmouth Navy Yard. He has had over 22 years experience in submarine test dives. Squalus is going to head out to sea. She's going to go past the Isle of Shoals. The weather was turning, sun fading, clouds on the horizon, wind picking up, sea starting to build. Naquin is headed to an area about 5 miles past the Isle of Shoals. Estimated depth at that point was 250 feet. At 8:13, according to the ship's log, notification and location of the dive site is recorded and sent to Portsmouth. A message was sent, but either in the transmission or the receiving, the location was incorrect by 5 miles east of the actual dive site. At 8:30, Naquin orders rig for dive. The next sound heard was that of the klaxon dive alarm. On the surface, the North Atlantic surges over the deck and above her tower. Then she was gone. Here's a cutaway of the typical, this is actually a side view of the submarine showing the various compartments. The control room is dead center below the periscopes and the antennas. The engine rooms are aft. Torpedo room is forward, and there's aft stern tubes. So at the beginning of the dive, there are 10 men in the control room. All indications point to a well-orchestrated test dive. Throughout the ship, men were at their positions, procedures closely followed. Visual indications, gauges, dials, pressure and depth recorders, and the Christmas tree, that visual control board displaying all green lights, confirmed that things are correct. Naquin's tracking the time of the dive, and at a depth of 50 feet, it looks like it's on track. Seconds later, Yeoman Second Class Cooney, the control room talker, receives a message from the engine rooms. Sir, the engine rooms are flooding. At that moment, everyone looks at the Christmas tree. All lights are green. Somehow, tons of water are racing into the engine room from the main induction valves. Within moments, she starts to sink by the stern. Attempts were made to blow ballast. It seemed for a moment to stop the descent, but then the sub starts to sink by the stern. Throughout the sub, men are trying to stop leaks by closing valves. The angle of the descent increases, causing men to have to hang on to anything. Watertight doors are being closed in spite of screams from men trapped in flooded compartments. The lights fail, and they're replaced by the emergency lights, which cast an eerie glow in compartments with water shooting out of various pipes and fittings. The Squalus finally settles on the bottom, 243 feet below the surface. Her lights are out, she has no heat, and the water temperature is close to freezing. Nobody knows for sure the condition aft. They know no communications come from the areas aft of the control room, the engine rooms, the battery room, and torpedo rooms. Attempts at voice communication fail. A head count's taken, and it reveals a total of 33 men forward. As the crew tries to sort out what had happened and what the next step could be, there was one realization, that as of 1939, there had never been a successful rescue of trapped submariners. Men going into the submarine service usually thought, it probably happens, but not to me. Or, well, at least it would be quick. It was considered bad form to talk about it. There were cases of submarines lost prior to this. The S4 was sunk in December of 1927 off Cape Cod in water 110 feet deep. No survivors. They could hear the sound of men pounding on the sides for 3 days. 40 men were lost. The S51 was sunk off of Block Island in water 131 feet deep. Again, no survivors. And the Squalus is 243 feet. below the surface. On the bottom, the crew is assessing their situation. It appears that the 3 aft compartments are flooded and there is no communication from these areas. Forward are a total of 33 men. It's believed the water flooding the ship came in through the induction valves, even though the Christmas tree showed all lights green. Captain Naquin has ordered the men to remain still. Don't talk more than a minimum. Huddle together to keep warm. Sleep if possible. And above all, remain calm. The lights are out. All they have are 3 emergency handheld lights. It's getting colder. Many of the men are still wet from the incoming water, and the air is becoming foul. Naquin has several cans of carbon dioxide absorber, which he will ration as the time goes by. But for now, he wants to focus on helping the rescue ships finding the Squalus. He orders the release of a red smoke rocket, which would soar about 80 feet from above the surface, releasing a cloud of red smoke. Next, he orders the release of a marker buoy, which is bright yellow, 3 feet in diameter. It's held in place by a cable attached to the submarine. Inside the buoy was a telephone. On the outside was a message: submarine sunk here, telephone inside. At 10 a.m., a 3rd rocket is fired. By 12:30, 3 more, none of which yield any sightings. Naquin orders the men to not even talk about their plight. Done is done. There is nothing we can do about it here. They will find us. On the surface, Sculpin is scanning the horizon. The Sculpin is an exact duplicate of the Squalus. Suddenly, 300 yards in front of her, a 7th rocket bursts. Next, the telephone buoy is picked up. Squalus has been found. Using the phone, a message: "Hello, Squalus. This is Sculpin. What's your trouble?" This was heard on board the Squalus when suddenly the line went dead. On the surface, a sudden wave had pulled the cable loose from the cleat on the Sculpin. She was lost again. Back in Portsmouth, Admiral Cole, he's in charge of all submarine activity. He's going through a routine day. He's overseeing operations of various submarines, including Squalus. He knows she was scheduled to make a routine test dive, and upon completion, she would transmit a message with the results of the dive. As the hours pass by with no word from Squalus, Cole and others become more concerned. Checks with the Coast Guard lookout station disclose they'd seen her some 3 hours before, but no sign since. Cole orders the Sculpin, her sister ship, continue to remain over the dive area and remain looking for any sign of her. Anxiety levels are rising. Something must be wrong. Cole confers with Admiral Lockwood. He is head of the entire all submarine operations. And he asks for the status of the Falcon. The Falcon was an ex-minesweeper converted into a submarine rescue vessel. She's stationed in New London, Connecticut. She's one of the Navy's first rescue vessels, and she contains not only all the equipment needed to rescue men trapped below, such as a rescue chamber, a recompression chamber, compressed air lines, electric cables, telephone lines, and countless other items to assist in any rescue. Equally important, she also carries a contingent of the Navy's most experienced divers and all their equipment. That's the good news. The downside is she's small, slow, and has minimum space for all the miles of lines, hoses, and cables needed for rescue work. Another problem is that due to her small size, she's only 1,600 tons. She would be difficult to maintain station in deteriorating weather. She's in New London, Connecticut. Falcon is dispatched at once. Cole's next order, get Momsen. Swede Momsen this is him. He's Annapolis, class of 1920. His first 2 years were on a battleship, but he transferred to the submarines. Momsen loved the world below the surface. His first command was the O-15, a submarine in 1923. He would spend his entire career dedicated to submarine rescue, diving techniques, diving operations, design, and without any doubt be responsible for numerous submariners' lives being saved as a result of his theories, his experiments, trials, and vision. He was also a man who would tend to buck the system or ruffle some feathers or bypass the chain of command. This would cost him at various points in his career, but it would never deter the zeal and commitment he had for advancing his beliefs. May 23rd, 1939, he's at the Washington Navy Yard. He's supervising a test dive by his divers in a compression tank who are using a new combination of helium and oxygen developed by Momsen. He gets the call from Portsmouth, and along with two of his most experienced divers, he boards a plane for Portsmouth. This is an opportunity to put into action some of his work in rescue for the past 14 years. On the flight to Portsmouth, he has time to reflect on all of the tragedies of trapped submariners who had no successful rescue. He recalled the despair and the realization there was nothing you could do. This was his chance. Here's a picture of Momsen. He's holding the Momsen lung, and this is every man on a submarine was trained in the use of this, and they would allow a man to escape from the submarine on the bottom, and it could allow the breathing rate as well as the breathing mixture to change so that as the man got higher and higher, closer to the surface, he would not experience the bends. Every man in the subs knew how to wear the Momsen lung and use it. So here's a picture. And this man is actually standing on the escape hatch. Each submarine had one forward and one aft. This is the Falcon. Not a sleek-looking warship, but she's worth her weight in gold. Over the suspected area of the Squalus, a growing number of ships are in a circle. One of them, the Pennacook, is a tug, and she's going back and forth, dragging a grapple hook, which hopefully would secure on the Squalus. Other vessels, the Wandank, the Chandler, and several Coast Guard cutters, they're all overhead, anxiously awaiting. The Coast Guard even has planes up there. They're awaiting the arrival of the Falcon. The weather's turned bad. Rising seas, heavy winds, fog. That's slowing down the rescue effort, finding the exact location. But at 7:30, the Pennacook, she succeeds in hooking onto the Squalus. More good news follows with the projected arrival of the Falcon at 4 a.m. They set up a communication line between one of the rescue ships on top, the Wandank, and the Squalus. And they have the men hammer out messages in Morse code. It is physically draining as they have to pound out each word 3 times. One message from Naquin states, conditions satisfactory, but cold. It did get through though. At 7:30, Momsen arrives and he reports to Admiral Cole, who puts him in charge of all diving operations. They discuss matters, and even though every man on the Squalus has been trained on the Momsen lung, it would be less risky to have the men escape using the rescue chamber, which is on the Falcon. More good news is the arrival of the Falcon at 4 a.m., but due to adverse sea conditions and weather, it's going to take until 9:45 before she is in ideal position to use the rescue chamber. Falcon's going to be held in place by 5 different anchors. On board the Falcon, Momsen insists that a diver must be used before any lowering of the rescue chamber to verify that conditions below are correct. He further insists all divers to familiarize themselves with the layout on the Sculpin, as she is an exact sister ship to the Squalus. This is the rescue chamber. This will be lowered to the submarine and secured to the escape hatch on the submarine. But before Momsen allows the rescue chamber to be lowered, he wants to send divers down to make sure that the hookup of the rescue chamber will in fact work. There'll be nothing obstructing the rescue chamber securely. So he selects the first diver. He selects his chief bosun, Martin Sabetsky. He's a diver. Momsen knows all of these divers. They've worked together for years. You can see all the men on board the Falcon. You can see a diver being lowered. He's got his helmet on. He's got the weight belt. He's got the heavy shoes. That equipment that the diver will have to wear will be in excess of 200 pounds. There's the rescue chamber in the stern of the Falcon. Here's one of the boats that's just, there was a circle of boats surrounding her. Here's a picture of the Sculpin. There's a tug. This shows you how crowded and how little space there is. It shows the men that there's not a lot of room on the, not a lot of working room. One of the dangers of having divers go down at that depth, 200 to 250 feet, is they face a danger of mental challenges. They lose focus. They get a sense of confusion. They have memory loss, and sometimes they even become giddy. So they constantly need to repeat to themselves the task they are to perform. Sabetsky's job is land on the deck of the Squalus and fasten a steel cable to the escape hatch from which the rescue chamber can be lowered to. In a piece of extremely good luck, he will note that the hook is secured to a railing less than 10 feet from the escape hatch. After fastening the cable, he will gradually be brought back to the service. He spent 22 minutes on board the Sculpin affixing the cable, and he spent 40 minutes being raised back to the Falcon. Momsen approaches Sabetsky and he says, "Well done, Ski." Here's a picture of him as he's being raised out of the water. And here he is. Excellent diver. Absolutely one of the key players. He's the first guy that has been down there and back. So the rescue chamber is now ready to be lowered. There she is. You can see the top of her. Momsen is concerned with how many men you can carry in one trip. The first trip down, there are 2 men that have to operate the chamber. So the first trip coming back will hold 7 men. And of the 7 men, those selected, the first man would be 1 civilian, Harold Preble, and also 1 officer, because you needed an officer to convey a list of known survivors. Aboard the Squalus, the men are standing patiently awaiting their turn to escape. They're all calm, there's no pushing or shoving, no attempt at being selected before anybody else. Aboard the Squalus, the first trip is loaded and it is raised to the Falcon. It was successful. For the second trip, 8 men are to be loaded. They lower the rescue chamber, load it, and they bring it back up. And it was discovered that not 8, but 9 men were aboard. This indirectly reduces the number of trips left to the great relief of Momsen. The third trip held 9, and the fourth trip was slated for the remaining 8 men. On the last trip, the last man to board the chamber was Captain Naquin. This trip started off smoothly, but problems ensued. The cable hauling upwards became frayed and was in grave danger of breaking. If the cable broke, all bets are off. There will be no chance whatsoever of rescuing the men trapped in the chamber. Through a series of brilliant and exact adjustments to ballast and tension and repairs, the chamber was finally secured with all the men safe. Time was 00:38, May 24th. The men had been on board on the bottom for almost 39 hours. A total of 33 men had been rescued from the bottom. Never before had men been saved from such a depth. Momsen's commitment, dedication, and vision was directly responsible for this day. Following the rescue of the men from the forward compartments, there was some talk of sending divers down to see if there was any chance at all of survivors aft. The Navy at first said rescue operations would continue. Momsen was hesitant. He agreed to do so. The first step was to move the downhaul cable from the forward hatch to the aft hatch. This was very difficult, but after 3 dives, it was completed. Next was another descent of the escape chamber. This trip posed numerous unknowns. For one, there was no guarantee the seal would be watertight. Another was variable air pressure once the hatch was open due to the flooding. Lastly was increased carbon dioxide with nowhere to vent. 2 senior divers would man the chamber. Momsen advises they would have only 20 minutes. They opened the hatch. They could confirm the area was completely flooded. There was no chance of any survivors. The men in the chamber were under intense pressure for 17 minutes. Close the hatch. Come up, ordered Momsen. What remained was to raise and salvage the Squalus. Stuck in the mud, 243 feet below the surface, half full of water, with fuel tanks full, she presented an extremely challenging problem. How do you raise something longer than a football field, weighing over 1,450 tons, and then tow it back to the Navy Yard? With incredible persistence and focus, on September the 13th, Squalus was finally raised. This is a drawing showing how they would do it. These barrels, they're pontoons, they would raise the submarine to a certain level and then bring her upriver. They would then stop. They would reload the barrels, the chambers. Ultimately, they would get her back to Portsmouth. In this performance, it involved 640 dives. Not one man was lost. The rescue operation would be heralded around the world, resulting in numerous navies rushing to adopt the lessons learned and also order equipment to facilitate the submarine rescue. Once news reached Portsmouth from the initial survivors, the joy and relief of the families of those rescues was confirmed. On the other hand, the sorrow and pain of those lost men was realized. Rescue efforts were over. What remained was to raise the Squalus and bring her back. These are pictures. This whole episode was in the headlines all the time. Newspapers were covering it every day. Airplanes were circling over with newsmen. It made the newsreels constant public awareness of this situation. Here's a picture of her. The bow is cracked the surface. She escapes a couple of times. Now she's going to sink back. There's one of the tugs. Another picture, you can see plenty of ships available. This was a huge project. Here she is, and you can see the flotation chambers fore and aft. There's her number, 192. This picture here, the bottom, the boat on the bottom, the fellow standing holding on to the rail, he was almost knocked overboard. That's Momsen. Here she's being towed at a certain depth. These are the size of the pontoons. She's above the surface. You can see the damage. Here's one of the control rooms. There's some damage in it, flooding the torpedo room. Here she is, back at the Navy Yard. The Navy did a thorough inspection, a complete refurbishing, a complete repair. This is all due to his efforts. This is a list of the survivors. There would be a memorial service, a benefit concert, July 30th, 1939 in Portsmouth. I have this booklet, it's amazing. There was a concert. They played Beethoven's Fifth. They ended the concert with the Navy hymn, and a private airplane dropped a memorial float, a wreath of flowers over the site where she went down. February the 9th, 1940, the Squalus is renamed as the Sailfish. FDR was quoted as saying she reminded him of a fighting sailfish when she burst through the surface during her rescue operations. She was commissioned on May 15th, 1940. She was under the command of Lieutenant Commander Morton Mummer, Jr. On January 16th, she heads to the Pacific to be stationed at Pearl Harbor. Commander Mummer, he was adamant that there would be no mention of her past as the Squalus. That and mention about any connection of her would result in harsh discipline, even to the point that he would not allow her former commanding officer, Captain Naquin, to board her. Here she is, completely refurbished. She's on her way to the Pacific. As rumors of war approach, Mummer was demanding total readiness for action from officers and crew. He boasted that he would be one of the most cold-blooded leaders of attack, and if anybody was afraid, now is the time to get out. Following the attack on Pearl Harbor, most submarines in the Pacific were reassigned to the Asiatic Fleet based in Manila. December 13th, 6 days after Pearl Harbor, Sailfish comes in contact with 2 Japanese destroyers. She fires 2 torpedoes, but with no confirmed damage. The destroyers commence depth charging. They drop 18 to 20 depth charges. They result in minimal damage. Mummer, the commanding officer, becomes highly nervous. He locks himself in his cabin. He leaves command of the Sailfish to his executive officer. She returns to Manila on December the 19th. Sailfish would start her second patrol several days later with a new captain, Richard Vogue. America was so desperate for heroes, even to the point that Mummer was awarded the Navy Cross and credited with the sinking of a destroyer. Sailfish would serve throughout the war, having completed a total of 12 patrols. Here's the Sculpin. They're identical to each other. They're both in the Pacific. The first 4 months of the war produced numerous setbacks, not only for America, but the Royal Navy, the Australian Navy, and Dutch forces. America's fleet lay in the mud of Pearl Harbor, Guam, Wake, Hong Kong, Malaya, and Singapore, and the Philippines. They all fell to the Japanese. The Asiatic fleet had to leave the Philippines and be headquartered in Java. Ultimately, its submarines would be assigned to Australia. This increased distance to safe operating bases would greatly diminish the amount of actual contact with the enemy and consume much, much needed fuel. Here is a picture of the Sculpin, a close-up, looking at our superstructure. Here is the Sculpin that she's taken, this is May 1943. She was at the Navy Yard getting refurbished and new additional equipment. So for the first 6 months to a year, American submarines in the Pacific had very, very minimal success. They had a number of serious shortcomings. One, pre-war doctrine. The doctrine of submarine utilization focused upon make sure you have excessive distance from your targets, an unrealistic fear of being spotted on the surface. Do whatever you can to avoid detection. And the primary function of American submarines would be to attack battleships, cruisers. Don't waste your efforts on merchant vessels or destroyers. Before the war, average age of commanders was 37. And as a breed, they stressed caution rather than aggression. But far and away, the biggest problem American subs had was with the US torpedoes. The US torpedo had a range of 4,500 yards at 46 knots, and it left a wake. It left a trail on the surface. Japanese torpedoes had a 900-pound warhead. They could go 49 yards further than American torpedoes, and they had an oxygen-powered engine which did not leave any wake. The American torpedoes had three major problems. It ran too deep from its setting. In some cases, the torpedo went 10 to 12 feet below the actual setting. In cases where the submarine, the torpedo was directly on target, it would simply pass underneath the target by 5 or 6, as many as 10 feet below. There were also cases of premature explosions and faulty contact exploders. As in some cases, the torpedo would strike, but the contact exploder was not working. The Pacific sub-commanders would have to spend 2 years dealing with these problems before they actually got them under control. But as the war went on, more and better equipped boats would join the fleet. Recaptured islands became less distant havens. They were closer for us and closer for replenishment ports. Japanese shipping losses, warships and merchants soared. The biggest problem was the torpedoes, but the lack of aggressiveness would haunt the submarine fleet until mid-June of 1942. Lack of aggressiveness, overcautious tactics, and poor leaderships from captains led to poor results. June of 1942, Rear Admiral Charles Lockwood, he relieved 1/4 of his commanding officers for lack of aggression and leadership. As the war went on, younger and bolder officers would turn the trend. This is a destroyer which is built, named after a captain of the Sculpin. His name was John P. Cromwell. Excuse me. On November the 5th, 1943, the Sculpin leaves Pearl Harbor. She's beginning her 9th war patrol. She's passing the overturned hull of the Oklahoma. Crews listening to the Navy band playing Aloha and Sink 'em All. Aboard her was her new commander, Lieutenant Commander Fred Conaway, 32 years old. He would replace the legendary Lieutenant Commander Chappell. This is Lieutenant Commander Chappell. He had led the Sculpin since the beginning of the war. In addition to Conaway is the squadron commander, Captain John Cromwell. He joins the boat at the very last moment. He had been assigned to be the commodore of a 3-sub wolf pack based upon the success rates German U-boats had off America's east coast. The target area was to be the island of Truk, where much of the Japanese fleet was held in reserve. We were putting into practice a wolf pack, more than 1 or 2 submarines that could operate together just as the German U-boats did. And the area they picked was near the Gilbert Islands. Cromwell is a captain. His job is to monitor the operation, the joint efforts of the 3 subs for further implementation. And he's also highly placed in the planning and the selection of the Gilbert Islands to be the first major island assault in the Pacific. It would be called Operation Galvanic. It was ultra top secret, and only an absolute minimum number of personnel had access to. This was so secret that Cromwell was advised, in the event of his capture, he should get down with the ship. Sculpin arrives southwest of Truk. She makes contact with a convoy on November the 19th. She surfaces briefly. Targets viewed as 1 large transport escorted by 7 smaller escort vessels. She submerges again. She's positioning herself for an attack. Suddenly, the convoy changes direction and heads toward the Sculpin. She goes to an immediate emergency dive of 200 feet. The convoy passes over without dropping any depth charges and continues on its way. Several hours later, at 7:30, Sculpin surfaces for a better look, because they're wondering why. What happened? They passed over us, nothing, no depth charges, nothing. They see nothing at first. And then somebody looking aft notices a crow's nest aft. Orders are given, take her down. In fact, the item seen was a large destroyer, the Imperial Japanese Navy Yamagamo. She was a trailer destroyer. She was hoping to catch a submarine off guard. On her first pass, Yamagamo drops 17 600-pound depth charges. Every 30 seconds, they're dropping them. Her second pass, she drops 18 charges directly over the boat. Damage to the boat is everywhere. Broken glass, shattered instruments, leaks, flooding, the hull's cracking. The boat is becoming more and more unresponsive. At 09:30, the Yamagamo drops more depth charges. It drives the Sculpin to a depth of 400 feet. The depth gauge, that's a critical piece of equipment, is erratic. It's stuck, saying 170 feet. Sculpin, suddenly, her bow shoots up into the air and she surfaced. She's some 5,000 yards away from the Yamagamo. Again, Sculpin goes down below. She's desperately trying to escape. She's becoming less responsive. Boats losing control. As they try to regain trim and depth control, the Yamagamo makes another run, dropping more depth charges. The sub is suffering widespread damage, leaks, flooding, steering motors becoming less functional. Sound controls are broken. She's without ears. She's been under severe depth charging for 5 hours. Her commander, Conaway, realizes she can't take any more. He issues orders to surface. He orders the gun crew to man the deck guns and engage the enemy. Part of his logic was that surface, there might be some chance for some of the crew to be saved. At the same time, Conaway prepares for the boat to be scuttled. Due to the highly classified plans regarding Operation Galvanic, it's essential for the boat to be destroyed, thus preventing any loss of the classified material. The decision is in accord with Captain Cromwell's orders to go down with the ship to avoid capture and interrogation. Sculpin surfaces at approximately 1 o'clock. She received several hits immediately in the conning tower, which killed a number of men, including Commander Conaway and several other officers. Below deck, emergency speed was ordered, followed by abandoned ship. Captain Cromwell was sitting looking at a picture of his wife as the boat is being scuttled. At about 1500 hours, Yamagamo picks up 41 survivors, 3 officers and 3 men, and 38 men. And she brings them to Truk Atoll, where they're beaten and questioned for 10 days. The prisoners were split into 2 groups, and they're placed aboard 2 aircraft carriers. Just before we get to the final result, this was Lewis's chapel with the Sculpin's flag. Each of the flags represents a ship lost. Here's a picture of him again. Really a very, very good commander. This is one of the officers on board the Sculpin. Crew members on board the Sculpin. This was on her 4th patrol. Again, another picture of her. These are young guys. When you look at them, I mean, they're confident, full of confidence. Things are going well. She's a noble. She's doing a great job. This is after the crossing of the equator, her first crossing of the equator. And, you know, that's when you have to meet King Neptune. Of these men, only the man on the right, George Rokek, will survive. This is the Yamagamo. This is the Japanese destroyer, which was trailing the convoy. This is an illustration of what it must be like on board the submarine as she's taking water, she's springing leaks. Here's an artist's interpretation of men as they're being depth charged. Unbearable, terrible. Each one of them, I mean, they would clang off the hull. Some would be so close that rivets would pop. Terrible. This is the Chuyo. She is a Japanese aircraft carrier. She will have 21 prisoners on board her from the Sculpin. On December the 2nd, 1943, the Chuyo is sailing towards Japan, and the Sailfish spots her. And the Sailfish torpedoes her. And of the 21 Americans, only 1 man, George Rojek, will survive. He will be recaptured, and he will spend the rest of the war in a prisoner of war camp. Here's the other ship, which made the transit to Japan safely. The irony that the submarine, which did everything she could to help assist the Squalus in her rescue, would be sunk by the Sailfish, is just one of the fortunes of war. There was no way for Americans to know who was on board a Japanese ship. They estimate in World War II, the loss of Allied prisoners of war in transit to Japan was about 10,000 Allied prisoners who were lost in the sinking of ships transporting them to Japanese labor camps. Most of those lost simply vanished at sea. There were no records kept and no information except for an occasional survivor. In September 1944, 2 Japanese freighters were carrying 1,800 British and 718 Australian prisoners from Singapore to Japan. The American submarine Sea Lion sank, and 3 nights later, the Pampanado sank the second ship. Out of the 2 Japanese ships, only 159 of the 1,518 who left Singapore survived. Some survivors heard some British sailors feebly singing, "Rule Britannia, Britannia rules the waves," as they waited their turn to die. 2 days later, an American submarine picked up 72 men floating and near death. The war record: Sailfish, 7 ships sunk, 45,000 tons, 1 presidential unit, 10 patrols. Sculpin, 3 ships sunk, 9,800 tons. World War II submarine losses: 52 American submarines listed as still on patrol, 374 officers, 3,371 enlisted men. It was a 22% loss. 1 out of every 5 men in the submarine service was lost. American submarines rescued 504 aviators. By VJ Day, the day the war ended, 2,117 Japanese ships were sunk. 9 million tons of shipping, and US subs accounted for over 55% of them. It was an amazing story. And I'm happy to be able to retell the events of this story. So Cindy, I would be glad to entertain any questions.
Yes, definitely. So if anybody has any questions, you can feel free to either unmute yourself and ask directly, or put it in the chat. But my goodness, Bob, that was an incredible story. That was both inspirational and heartbreaking. So thank you so much.
Well, you're welcome. I sometimes tend to bounce around a little bit, and it's tough keeping everything, in sequence. So I apologize. A couple of pictures are out of sequence, but basically the story is, this was an amazing sacrifice, and it's a long time since the Second World War, and this is history that's in danger of disappearing unless we keep, going back sometimes to tell these stories.
Absolutely.
Anybody want to have any questions? I better warn you all out.
We're just getting lots of fantastic lecture. Thank you very much. Amazing talk. I learned so much. You were so thorough that I don't have any questions. Wow.
Well, thank you.
So interesting. Thank you. We need to remember.
All righty. Thank you very much. And again, it was a pleasure speaking to your patrons.
Oh, thank you so much for a wonderful evening. And I hope to have you back because
Well, I hope
to be a wealth of knowledge.
Thank you, ma'am. Very good, Cindy.
Well, thank you. And thank you, everybody, and have a wonderful evening.
All right. Good night.